Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again bringing the 7.2.5 disc changes and where we stand at the moment with the spec. Alright, so starting it off, let's start with the developer notes. The devs were always kind enough to leave us with some notes as to what their goals were, which I always really appreciate because we're getting the mindset of where they're coming from with the spec. Alright, so getting into it, the developer notes. One of our goals for 7.2.5 is to give Plea and Powered Radiance a more straightforward purpose and allow for more opportunities to use both based on the situation. That sounds pretty good. I'd love to use more Plea and stuff like that. Radiance allowing an immediate penance heal on more targets more quickly should help with some of Discipline's difficulties in responding promptly to damage. So the translation there is that they are recognizing that if you do not ramp up very efficiently, if you're not preparing for the damage every single time, you can fall behind and you can lose out on a big chunk of healing compared to other healers which have, say, you see the damage happen, you immediately cast the abilities. By being very proactive, you can be very punished by the healing. So they're saying we would like to accelerate this method in order to allow Disc Priest to more rapidly respond to the damage so that the punishment is much less, the benefit is much higher. Plea being an always available Atonement Applicator without having to constantly evaluate the mana cost should help with the overall flow of the spec. I could agree with that as well. And Sigma, which is one of the class developers, also delivers on this in a little bit higher of an area. So again, let's focus on just the goals for what they would like to see first, and let's see if they complete it, all right? First, some problems with Live Discipline by Sigma. The mana cost mechanic on Plea is clumsy, makes the spell require a complex evaluation to use it all. I would agree. You're looking at how many atonements that you have out, and if you do not have an atonement tracker through a weak aura or any kind of add-on or something like that, well, it can really hurt you because you're using a Plea. Oh, oops, I accidentally used it at 13 atonements, and I just drained a huge chunk of my mana to get one atonement out. It's pretty painful, and it's very punishing if you are not using different add-ons or if you're not staying on top of the spec. Very, very punishing. So I would agree with that. That's an issue. I'd love to see just a flat mana cost to it. Relatedly, Powered Radiance is a no cooldown Atonement Applicator that is better than Plea in almost every way, and is basically limited only by mana. While I don't really see an issue with it having no cooldown, because again, the spec has actually worked for, how many months are we? 6-7 months or something like that, where Powered Radiance has worked without a cooldown. So I don't see the cooldown being an issue, but yeah, I would agree. Radiance is better than Plea in just about every way on Live Disc. So the spec is now balanced around very high atonement count in raids, from using Radiance as much as possible, being the only discipline is strong. High-end players have gotten used to this playstyle as well. So of course, yeah, you're ramping up in a large number of mechanics. The spec is very dependent on mana, since more mana turning into more Radiances is virtually the only thing constraining your healing. I would agree with this. If you'd like to read the full post by Sigma, it'll be linked in the description below. So yeah, I would agree with his analysis. The fact that you are spending all kinds of crazy mana in order to be getting higher atonements, higher healing, and higher ramp-ups. Of course, I mean, that's how the spec works. And that's how it came out of the, 8 months of alpha beta that we did testing for. So yeah, that's how it happens. So now we're getting 7.2.5 where we're getting a number of balance changes. Let's dig into it. Divine Star cost reduced by 20%. Halo cost reduced by 25%. This is more irrelevant. I mean, the fact that it's, cost reduction is kind of nice. Plea now costs 2% of base mana, was 0.36%, but no longer costs additional mana per atonement. I like the idea that it's a flat cost no matter what, but 2% of mana, I think it's like 22k mana or something along those lines. A little bit less than a flash heal if you're playing a priest, or a holy priest, I should say. Seems kind of high. And if you want to be slowly ramping up atonements, it seems like a very high cost just in general. So if you are trying to get, say, a moderate amount of atonements out, maybe it'll just be better to be using Radiance anyway, which runs counter to the theory that you want to be using Plea and Radiance by the developer's own notes. So maybe this is a tuning issue. Okay. Powered Barrier. Mana cost reduced by 37%. Radius increased by 23%. The radius increase is nice. Mana cost is okay. Totally fine. Whatever. Nothing too groundbreaking here. Be nice to have. Now here's where we actually get to the bread and butter. Powered Radiance now has 2 charges and a 15-second recharge. So you have 2 charges, 15-second recharge. You have to make sure that whenever you are casting your Powered Radiances that they are being used at the most effective time possible. Otherwise, you're going to be out in the cold without any kind of atonements out and not the ability and lacking the ability to actually apply them for a decent mana cost, otherwise you're screwed. Power Radiance now applies 5 atonements, was 3, at half the normal duration, was 100%. If you played in Alpha Beta, you would realize that this is actually just to harken back to the same thing that they replaced in Alpha Beta, because players realized this is clunky, it's unintuitive, and generally just bad for the game. Now keep in mind, there was actually no charge-based system back in Alpha Beta. So what is lacking here is the developers' methodology for saying, this is why we're adding charge-based systems again. Because guess what? Charge-based systems in WoW are pretty good, but you can't just add them to every single mechanic in the game and expect a better result out of whatever you're putting it into. You know? So right here, if we are in, say, for example, a fight like Trilliax or any kind of fight with any kind of burst damage. So, I mean, we could even be in Croesus. But, I mean, if you're looking at any kind of fight where you are ramping up with both of your Radiances on cooldown to be able to use a large amount of atonements, have a large amount of atonements out, getting a very strong Light's Wrath, well, you have such a hefty cooldown to this Radiance that you are not able to sufficiently deal with the next incoming damage. So, if we're in a fight like Trilliax, which is kind of all in, whether or not you are able to sufficiently get your atonements out before the damage actually goes out, if there is any damage to go out to begin with, you're looking for when any kind of scrubbers might explode or might detonate. Well, if you are preparing both of your powered Radiances and putting them both on cooldown, getting a large amount of atonements out, and then guess what? Turns out someone soaks that scrubber, and then it does not detonate. You're waiting a couple extra seconds, and by the time that your atonements are already falling off, but not before your first powered Radiance comes off cooldown again, you have a scrubber detonate, and you have only a handful of atonements out on your 20 or even 30-man raid group, and you are barely able to deal with it by just applying Plea and Shadow Mend in order to get people topped off. And by the way the balancing is looking so far, it looks like you'd just be spamming Shadow Mend in order to apply atonements if the Shadow Mend is actually going to be healing people. So you're looking into a really degenerate and just annoying playstyle that is intended to be an adaptation and a correction from what the developers view as a degenerate and boring playstyle. So there's a very much a disconnect here. I mean, you even go to a fight like Croesus where there's actually constant damage. Well, now you're just using your Powered Radiance's charges on cooldown and only having a handful of charges of Atonement out at a time. That is forcing you to restrict your mana consumption. Whereas in the past, your only mana consumption restrictions would be based off of your wisdoms, off of your innervates. Now you are being forced into this position where Radiances are less valuable, innervates are less valuable to you because you are only able to fit so many costly spells into a certain window in time. I mean, this to me just screams utter control of a spec that already is struggling, and it pushes it further and further into a position where it just does not want to be going and should not be going. This spec has been identified and has been molded by the developers through alpha and beta to be a pre-active burst healer that will instantly be reversing any kind of damage on the raid. Now they're trying to make it so that it's more sustainable in terms of sustainable damage as we are heading into a future tier. And if you have any experience in mythic raid healing or heroic raid healing throughout the history of WoW, you would know that as we get deeper and deeper into raiding, the power creep of healers gets larger and larger, and as a result, the burst damage gets higher and higher. So you're making a spec have poorer burst healing as we are entering a new tier where burst healing will become more important than ever before. It's just, I don't even know where to go from this. To be quite honest, I don't even know where we're going from this because we have such a large disconnect between the player base and between the developers that is not being bridged at the moment. And while this is early in 7.2.5, I would like to just make this expressly clear that we love the game. We love the work that you guys put into it, but this is the wrong way that the spec is heading. And there's a very large disconnect between what we would like to see and what the developers are working on at the moment. This is the wrong path. Going into the smite damage, it is, the smite damage increase or the cost reduction for smite are fairly irrelevant. Even the penitence effect is fairly irrelevant. So what we're seeing here is just this huge focus on how we are applying atonement and how the spec is actually going to be running that is just completely disconnected with reality for what disciplined priests are actually experiencing. And the worst part of it is that the developers, from the looks of it, seem to identify what the issue is, but just have no idea with how to actually fix it. And maybe that's where we can come in and where we can provide useful feedback, you know. Some of the things is I like the fact that Flea has a standard cost reduction, but what I'd like to see is something more where you are rapidly able to fit the goal that the developers have set, where you're actually able to have the immediate penance heal on more targets more quickly. You know, more targets more quickly every single time, or not even every single time. Something where you are able to have maybe a 3-minute cooldown where you're able to rapidly apply multiple atonements or a heavy amount of atonements on the raid while not having large amounts of prep for it, and making it a more reactionary cooldown where it is not the center of the spec, but it is something that is allowing you to have either a very large ramp up if you are preparing your power radiances in advance, or if you are a newer player or you're a casual player and you fall behind, or you make a mistake and you say, well, I guess I can use my ability now to mass apply a number of atonements, and then I will be okay and I will not fall very, very hard behind, and I will not let my raid down in this way. You know, this needs to be looked at. This is something that really has not been looked at, and I mean, there's many, many ways to fix it, and I've seen many, many good suggestions on the forums. All the links will be in the description below. Be sure to check them out and let me know what your thoughts are. But the fact stands that the developers have really missed their mark, and we would like to let them know, because we do care about this game, and because we do respect the part of feedback, I guess you could say. You know, hopefully the developers check this out. Let me know what your thoughts are for how you would improve the atonement application of the spec. Let's get our best thoughts out there from the community as to where we can improve disc and how we can best benefit the spec itself to further encourage people to be playing the spec and to improve the spec's representation in both Mythic rating and below. All right. Let me know what you guys think. Hope you all enjoyed this. Hopefully some of the developers check this out and stuff like that. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.